Hi, PJ Scott here with another edition of Veterans Forum. I created Veterans Forum in the Bremerton area of Washington State about 13 some odd years ago, and I've really enjoyed all the vets I've met. This program is meant to show the vet also is a real normal person, and just being in the military was part of his life experience. So this isn't primarily, again, about battles. However, I have to admit, sometimes it's difficult to get the whole vet's life in 28 minutes, so I gave up trying to reach that goal. With me today, I'm proud to have Vern Schmidt, who was in the Army during World War II. Welcome, Vernon.
Thank you.
Now, what division were you in? Were you in the Army?
I was with the 90th Infantry Division in the 3rd Army under General Patton.
Oh, General Patton, we've all heard of him. Well, there's some pictures here of Vern when he was in Europe, and before. That professional picture, was that taken when you were in Europe or here in the States before you left?
It was taken in the States just before I left.
Okay.
Yeah.
However, we're going to do 2 programs with Vern because he has a World War I father and 3 uncles that were involved in World War I. So that's going to be our topic today. And then in another show, we'll get Vern his own story about World War II. So tell us something about your father.
Well, my father was born in Hillsborough, Kansas. He came to the valley here near Fresno in 1913 and was called up and drafted.
How old was he?
He was born in 1894, so he would be about 19 years old.
Now, do you have some pictures of him, of your dad?
Yes, I do. This one right here.
Oh, okay. Give us your father's name.
His name was, actually he was born Jacob Schmidt, but somehow it got into his birth certificate as Jake, so everybody knew him as Jake Schmidt.
Oh, okay, that's fine. That's
and
fine.
He served from 1917 through 1919. Everything was stateside in his service. He was stationed at Deming, New Mexico. And then
where in New Mexico? Devon?
Deming.
I don't know
Deming,
that I've heard
New
of
Mexico.
Okay.
And then he was later sent up to Fort Lewis, Washington.
Well, I'm familiar with Fort Lewis, Washington. And what did he do while he was stateside?
You know, my brother and I were not privy to have him share much of his Army life. The only thing he really shared with us is at Deming, New Mexico, there was a severe epidemic of tuberculosis and flu broke out.
Oh.
This was in 1918. In fact, it swept a good portion of the nation at that time.
Right.
And he tells of so many of the young soldiers who didn't survive through that severe epidemic.
Well, that was a Spanish flu, wasn't it?
You know, again, he just did not share.
I'm sure, because that was the epidemic in Europe and the United States. And as a matter of fact, years ago, I interviewed a friend of mine whose uncle, it's like you survive World War I and you come home and you die of the Spanish flu. It just didn't seem fair.
Right.
Yeah, right. And it was a heat bed in those ships coming back. If anyone had Spanish flu and maybe didn't know it, and you're on a ship coming home, guess what? You infected so many people by the time you got off
True.
the ship. It was really, really quite sad and tragic.
True.
Okay. Well, maybe that's part of the reason he didn't want to talk about it. It was a lot of unhappy memories.
He just never shared with us. He was proud he served, but never did disclose much.
So you didn't even know what rank or rate he made? I mean, was he a mechanic or?
My brother and I both feel he was in quartermaster. We think that.
Okay.
We're not positive.
Okay.
But because, as I said, he just did not share with
Okay, good
with us.
educated guess. So you have 3 uncles, on your mother's side of the family.
That's correct.
In fact, there were 6 brothers, and 3 of them.
All 3 served in World War I.
Now, which is the older uncle?
This is the older one. This is Carl Albin Norn. We called him CA, and of course he was in the Air Force, or
Oh, okay.
Air Corps at that time.
So he's the pilot. Now tell us about this. This is a treasure. Tell us about this.
This was given to him upon his separation from service. He became an instructor in the old World War II Curtiss Jenny, which was a famous World War I airplane. And upon his completion of service, he was given a half of a wood propeller off of a Curtiss Jenny airplane. And this was his. He passed away in the early 60s, and he passed it on down to a brother. The brother passed away, passed it on down to the nephew, which I am the recipient. Very, very proud to have this souvenir.
This is really a treasure. Would you please read this, what it says, because I'm not sure the camera's going to be able to pick up all the words.
It says, "Souvenir of Chanute Field," which was up in Illinois. And he did training both in Berkeley, California. This was Special Military Academy in Berkeley. Then he was in Kelly Field in Texas, which is near San Antonio. Became an instructor and was shipped up to Chanute Field in Illinois, and there he became an instructor in the Curtiss Jenny. Became a second lieutenant. It's just a great guy.
Yeah, sounds like it. Now, did he actually ever go to Europe, or he was busy training pilots here that were going to go to Europe?
He trained pilots who eventually went to Europe. He stayed stateside.
Now,
So-
did he know how to fly before the war broke out?
No, he
Okay.
learned in the service.
Well, he must have been pretty good if they wanted him to train other enlistees.
He had involved himself and enlisted at Cal Poly University down in Paso Robles prior to World War I. He was a very dedicated person, and he wanted to be something. So he said, "I want to be a pilot," and he did. In fact, one of his younger brothers also became a pilot.
Well, let's do this in chronological order, but I have to say it's kind of amazing when you hear the story of thinking about, because when I think of Berkeley, I'm not thinking of World War I pilot training somehow. And then Cal Poly during World War I, did it even exist? So this is really good information we're putting out here to give
He
a
was
little
in Cal-
historical reference
He
here.
was in Cal Poly in 1912 and 1913, and then went up to Corvallis, Oregon, and to a university up there.
Oh, wow.
And then, of course, went into the service in 19...
Okay, so he was very well educated. All that without the GI Bill. That was a big reason I joined.
He was a terrific guy. We really enjoyed him as an uncle.
And how many children did him and his wife have?
They had no children.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
His wife was an elementary teacher right here in Fresno, California,
Oh, okay.
for many years.
Well, that's no doubt why you probably got this, or you'd have a cousin be having this pellet. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what about your next uncle?
The next uncle, of course, was the next one was Oscar Norn. He was, ironically, he wound up over in France in the 144th Field Artillery Regiment, which was part of the 40th Infantry Division, which is the California National Guard. So he served in World War I as a field artillery person over in France, and saw combat over in France in the field artillery.
Now, was he part of the California Guard before he went to Europe?
No, he enlisted in the service,
Oh, okay.
and he and a number of another buddy from Selma and several from around this area all went together and took their training, and then eventually embarked to England, and from England over into France.
So this brother, unlike this brother, what's this brother's name again?
This is Oscar.
Oscar. saw action, do we assume, while he was busy teaching guys to fly
How to
and
fly.
kill, and not kill the Nazis. Don't get those mixed up. It would have probably been called the Huns or something like that.
Right.
So, did he end up in the trench warfare and that kind of thing?
No, no. He was as is the norm. The artillery is behind the infantry, so he did not involve himself or was not involved in any trench warfare. They were behind the lines with artillery. So
Oh, okay. So they saw action of a different kind.
that's correct.
Right, right,
Yes.
right. So, any injuries from that? Because
No.
you can certainly, if
No, he-
artillery gets you, you're definitely
He
injured.
came home unscathed and turned out to be a great humanitarian. Helped several authors in this area writing books of early California history and the history of our Indians up in the area of Fresno and Tulare County,
Oh.
and became, you might say, almost a public advocate for the Indian people. He
Oh,
learned to
okay.
speak the Yukut language.
Oh, really?
And,
How interesting.
Was very, very devoted to humanitarian work for the Indians at that time, at his time here in
Oh,
California.
okay. Well, that's a nice.
Lived amongst them up in the mountains. Great guy.
Oh, wow.
Great guy.
You know, you might consider writing a little biography about him. That sounds fascinating. In fact, the whole family. So you got a lot of fodder there with 6 uncles and 3
Yeah.
of them in involved in World War.
He had one daughter who's just a year older than I am, and she's still living today. But
Now, did he become a history teacher?
no, he was a farmer.
Oh, okay.
A farmer and just a historian
Okay.
that loved people.
Fascinating, fascinating.
When he had his 90th birthday, he went
Oh.
down in the center square in Reedley and stood on his head for people to watch him at 90 years old stand on his head on the street corner.
Okay, sort of
Quite
a
a guy.
precursor of Bush jumping out of the airplane when he did. Okay, that's great.
Great guy.
Well, farmers have to be very agile and in shape, or they're not going to be farming for very long, are they? Now, do you have another little story about
the
him?
third uncle, I have no pictures of him
Oh.
whatsoever. He was in the Navy and did naval, and I have very little history on him. They just did not share, and we did not probe for some reason.
Uh-huh.
Kind of like today, my kids knew nothing about my service until I retired and became involved with veteran groups and so forth, and then the story came out.
I
had
must
my
have been born curious because I would frequently ask my mother, what did you do when you were a little girl? And Daddy, what did you do when you were in the Marines? Of course, I got the whitewashed version as a kid. But I'd ask my uncles, I had a lot of uncles in World War II, where'd you go, what'd you see? They left out mercifully all the blood and guts of it.
Right.
But I was always curious
Yeah.
about people's stories, and so here I am, still curious about people's stories.
But these 3 uncles have their, down at the Wall of Honor, down at the VA hospital, have their names all on the Wall of Honor.
Now,
for-
you have a picture of all 6 of those uncles, do
Yes.
you not?
Yes, I do. Right.
Okay, let's show this. And can you point out the ones that were, shall we say, pre-Air Force? I guess they would have been called Army Air Corps
Right.
back in the day.
Right.
Artillery,
Well,
and then your
the first
sailor.
one, they're standing in their age group. So this is the oldest one. This is the one that served in the Air Corps, or Air Service it was called.
Right.
And this is Carl Albin. This is Oscar Phillip. He was the one that served in the 144th Field Artillery of the 40th Infantry Division. And this is David Norn, and he's the United States Navy. And the rest, my other uncle, the next to the last one here, served in the Merchant Marine during World War II.
Oh, okay. That could be dicey. I've interviewed people that were in the Merchant Marines and don't think that the Japanese or the Germans are going to let them go by. That was really...
He made many trips, very secretive. He never told us what he was doing, shipping into Vladivostok, Russia. back in the 40s and 41 and 42. We never knew. He never was. We were. I believe he was sworn to secrecy. He
Oh, I
just
would
said I
imagine
was
so.
on a ship. But
Right.
what he hauled, I don't know. But those people risked their lives because they were basically
Definitely.
not very well armed ship, and a lot of them traveled by themselves. So, but
My post commander at Post 30 American Legion in Port Orchard, he was part of the Navy Armed Guard on merchant ships. And, you know, I guess he admitted it in his golden years, but I'm sure he wouldn't have when he was younger. That was really scary because you had limited weapons. I mean, you were not a battleship.
true.
Limited weaponry. He was in the Pacific, so they had to worry about the Japanese. And yeah, it was scary. And then submarines that you might not even see to do anything about.
True.
Yeah, right. So those guys were really heroes. All of them were really heroes.
They are, and none of those ever stood on a soapbox to tell us anything how great they were. They were dedicated. They came from immigrant parents from Sweden. They loved America,
Right.
and they felt it was their honor and duty to serve in the military during World War I.
Yes.
Great guys, uncles that shared many, many hours with my brother and I up in the mountains, tried to entertain us as little kids, taking us up some of the back roads in the hills up here east of Fresno, and
Right.
we just have cherished memories. Oscar rode a horse from Reedley up on top of Boyden's Cave.
Is this Oscar here?
Right, in 1919 when he came home. He and another fella took their horses and rode horseback up on top of Boyden's Cave, which is way down on Kings Canyon, and found the top opening that really has never been talked about. But they, you know, and
Sounds like quite an adventurer.
right.
Very
and of course,
curious.
at this particular time, they were cutting timber up there, and it was flowing down to Sanger in a wooden flume
Right.
of water. And these fellas, some of them would jump on a log and ride down a ways, and you know,
That could be oh so dangerous. I'm thinking,
It was.
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Yeah, if their mama saw that, they would have tanned their hide
right.
even though they were
But
adults.
this fellow had no fear.
Well, let's talk about the picture of your dad. Now, what did he do with the rest of his life after World War I?
My dad was a farmer by trade. He worked as a foreman to several farms here in the Reedley area, became a foreman. He also
Okay.
became a contractor in harvesting the raisin industry,
Oh, okay.
and had a cruise. We as kids, we picked grapes from Reedley to Kingsburg to Selma, Carruthers, you name it, all over. We picked grapes. My dad was a contractor and had a crew maybe of 50, 60 people. And then during World War II, he became a foreman over about 4 ranches and had men working under him. He was a great fella for.
Now, tell us your father's name again, because I dare say there might be some folks a little older now that might, in fact, remember your dad.
Well, his name was Jake Schmidt, a great
Jake
guy.
Schmidt,
Lived
yeah.
in Reedley from 1913 till the day of his death in 1975.
Okay.
And a great guy. Just was a wonderful father. And
How many children did you?
there was 3 of us. I have an
Oh.
older brother and a younger sister.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then the oldest uncle?
The oldest is that's my mother's oldest brother. He's the oldest of the family. My mother came next.
Oh,
And
okay.
he was born in 1890. And
And what did he do once he left?
once he left the service, he went to work for Fresno County as an agricultural inspector drove all over the county in a little Model A Ford and inspected ranches and checked agricultural for disease and various things. Very devoted guy. He loved the dirt. He loved the dirt. He was very clever at bushes and shrubs and such. When my wife and I first married, he would bring us pots and pots of all kinds of shrubs, and I said, what are we going to do with them? He says, if you don't like them after they get big, thin them out. He says, they didn't cost you anything.
Right, right.
But he was a great guy, and built his own home southeast of Fresno, an adobe home, built it all by himself. Great guy.
Wonderful. It sounds like you come from a really blessed family. And then the next one.
That was Oscar. Of course, he was a farmer and did a lot of custom work around the area here when they were building irrigation ditches and so forth. He had what they call a Fresno scraper, which was made here in Fresno by the Fresno Agricultural Works. And he did commercial work with horses. He loved horses and did an awful lot of commercial farming work for neighbors and around the area in Reedley with a team of horses.
And you know, has someone written a story about your family? Because I'm telling you, if you don't write it down, people either exaggerate facts, diminish, or worse yet, forget all about it.
Well, we have bits and pieces because this man was so instrumental in taking my brother and I into the mountains showing us Indian artifacts. He could almost smell where they had been an Indian camp or so forth.
Wow.
And would take us, and so we'll go over here around this, where all these rocks are, and we'll probably find some arrowheads. Sure enough, we'd kick a little dirt and up he'd find a little arrowhead.
Now, for the sake of genealogy and history, because I imagine you must have a boatload of cousins and they have children. If they were to do genealogy, tell us that little story that you were telling me before about Peterson and how every Tom, Dick, and Harry in that community's name was Peterson.
Well, my mother and her 6 brothers, their name would have been Peterson had their father not been a little innovative. When he came from Sweden and he worked as a brick mason in St. Paul, Minnesota. And as they were having lunch one day, he said, my name is Peterson, and everybody that I live around, their name is Peterson. And he said, my mail is mixed up with another Peterson. And the man sitting with him, he said, Mr. Peterson, for $1, you can go down to City Hall here at St. Paul and change your name. And he says, really? He said, yeah. So he said, well, what name shall I take? Well, he says, there's a little village over there in Sweden. You may even remember it. He said, it's over there in the Värmland area called Norren. He said, that would be a good name. So he said, that sounds okay. So he goes down, puts his dollar bill there at the City Hall and changes his name from Peterson to Norren. So, and a couple of his brothers thought that was a pretty good idea, so they went and did the same thing.
I didn't realize. Well, you know, I'm used to hearing names getting changed. I have a good girlfriend named Janet, and she was doing some genealogy on her husband. His name was Monty, but she came to a point where it just ran out. Well, it was this long Italian name, Monty DeFecco, blah, blah, blah,
Right.
And the people of Ellis Island just wasn't going to have it, so they just topped it and off they went. So these kinds of things happen that if you're studying your family history, and if you're not aware of this, you don't know where to go or what to do.
Right.
Well, listen, Vernon, we come to the end of our time, and this has been really enjoyable learning about your family, and I think for most people in Fresno, very interesting because you really do have long roots here in Fresno in the agricultural community.
We do.
So think about your World War I veterans, particularly during Veterans Day, because that was the great war to end all wars, supposedly. And we know that didn't happen, so now we refer to Veterans Day. Armistice Day is Veterans Day. Vern, thank you so much for being a guest on Veterans Forum. And next, we're going to get into your story.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
See ya next time. This is PJ Scott. Continue to pray for those disabled vets and for those that need caregivers. That can get very tiring and trying. And well, we just need a lot of prayer for different things going on in the world right now. Things could just blow up in our faces to some extent. It already has. So take care of yourselves, and if you're a vet, we're proud of you. Take care, and see you next time on Veterans Forum. PJ Scott signing off. Bye-bye.